But I do miss it.
The city of Riverside to you guys.
Oh, yeah. I look forward to meeting her.
All right.
Good to see you.
Good morning, everyone. I hate to interrupt the great conversations I can tell are happening, but I also want to try to keep us a bit on schedule this morning. Good morning. My name is Marc Berman. I'm the chair of the Select Committee on the Master Plan for Higher Education in California, and this is the first hearing of the Select Committee. And I want to welcome everyone here and those who are watching us on TV or online. And Senator Allen tells me that nobody's watching. Everyone's here. That's why. That's right. And I want to thank Speaker Anthony Rendon for authorizing this Select Committee to examine such a critical topic. In 1960, our state developed a visionary plan for the future of higher education known as the Master Plan. However, much has changed in California during the ensuing decades, from population growth to increased diversity, a change in leading industries and their need for talent, as well as in the field of education itself. There have been legislative reviews of the Master Plan at various points over the past 57 years. Major reviews occurred in the early 1970s, the late 1980s, and early 2000s. And the most recent review by a legislative committee was conducted in 2010, coinciding with the 50th anniversary of the Master Plan. My goal for this Select Committee is to hold hearings throughout the state to conduct a thorough legislative review to ensure that California has a Master Plan for today and for the future, and to again promise California students an accessible, affordable, high-quality public higher education. The Select Committee is the first step in a multi-year endeavor that could last up to 6 to 8 years or longer. I'm coming in with an open mind and do not have any preconceived notions or solutions, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. I view the first 2 years of the Select Committee as being the information gathering phase, where we hear from stakeholders and we collect feedback. The Select Committee plans to hold 5 hearings during this legislative session, the first and last hearing in Sacramento, as well as hearings throughout the state, including in the Bay Area, Southern California, and the Central Valley. The following 4 hearings will be issue-focused and examine subjects surrounding workforce needs, students, faculty and staff, and cost and funding, including financial aid. After the conclusion of the hearings, the Select Committee will issue a report likely at the end of next year, summarizing the hearings as well as recommending the next steps, such as what issues need to be focused on in more depth. The agenda for today's hearing is that the Legislative Analyst's Office will provide an overview of higher education in California, setting the stage for the remainder of the hearing. We will hear from the leaders of the 3 public higher education segments, as well as the president of the Association of Independent California Colleges and Universities, which are the private nonprofit institutions in California. And there will also be an opportunity for public comment, and we have a sign-up sheet by the front door. We have a sign-up sheet right here at the sergeant's desk for folks to sign up for public comment at the end of the hearing. Since this is the first hearing of the Select Committee, I envision this hearing being a high-level discussion on the state's needs from higher education, or for higher education, and not necessarily a discussion in the weeds around specific issues or solutions. In upcoming issue-specific hearings, we will dive deeper into specific issues. The Select Committee has a membership appointed on a bipartisan basis, and we are very fortunate to have members who have a strong interest and background in higher education, including Assemblymember Jose Medina, chair of the Higher Education Committee in the Assembly. And I'm also pleased to be joined by my friend, the chair of the Senate Education Committee, Senator Ben Allen. Thank you both for being here. And I want to recognize Dr. Weber as well for showing up on time. Thank you, Dr. Weber. With that, I want to welcome my colleagues who are here this morning. If you'd like to offer any opening remarks before we get started with our speakers.
Just very quickly, good to see my friend in the chair's seat I am looking forward to participating to the extent that I can in these discussions. I served as the student member of the Board of Regents when I was a law student at UC Berkeley, and care a great deal about our higher educational system, and very interested in being a part of this discussion as it moves forward. There's no question that the master plan has served the state of California tremendously well. There's also no question that a plan that was written in 1960 deserves a certain amount of updating and reexamination. Just even part of the reason why I was so anxious to be here is because at my committee, even in the last couple months, we've heard a number of bills, most of them from the State Assembly, that really do challenge some of the traditional relationships between the segments as laid out by the master plan. And so we are there's a macro challenge that we have in rethinking this. There's also a series of micro challenges that we're facing every single day in our committees as members try to figure out ways to make the system better address concerns that they have. And we're, I think, struggling with how the master plan continues to fit with some of the challenges that have been raised by some of our colleagues in some of our campuses. So I'm really excited about this discussion. I know that the Senate wants to be a part of this conversation too, and really looking forward. I also wanted to say to you, Mark, that it's great that you seem to be you want to roll this out in a very comprehensive way. And I'm also really heartened to see the full participation of our different segments. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be their engagement and input that's going to hopefully really shape this conversation, so that we can create a master plan, a new master plan for the state that's going to really work in the best interests of the future of our state. It's worked really well for us, but there's certainly some room for update and improvement. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Chair Berman. I want to thank first the leaders of each of the segments, President Napolitano, President Castro, who's here in the absence of Chancellor White, and Eloy Oakley, representing the California Community Colleges. Like my colleague in the Senate, I also have a keen interest in what we're doing here today and what we are beginning to do this morning. I was a student at UC Riverside, a community college trustee, and attended Cal State University San Bernardino for my administrative credential. So I have been a student, a representative of all three segments. The master plan, 1960, is to me almost a founding document. I know that all our systems precede 1960, but it was an important document. And from 1960, I think it was the promise to California students, to California high school students, that there was a place for them in higher education, no matter where they were academically, that there would be a place for them in higher education. So as my colleague said, it's been almost 50 years, and as we sit here in the legislature, we see ideas that challenge the premise of the master plan and how those three segments work together, cooperate together for the betterment of our students. So I'm very happy that our chair, Mr. Berman, took up the challenge. It's a big challenge, and I was sitting here in the audience years back when the legislature was considering it back then. And I know that it will not be easily done. It won't be anything that will be accomplished quickly, but I hope that in the years ahead, we can accomplish something. It is something that is needed, because there is no overriding structure, unfortunately, I think, in the state of California that oversees the three segments. I think it's something that is needed. We've heard ideas that have been put forward at different times in my 5 years here to have something like that. And absent that, it becomes even more important that we have something to replace, look at, and examine how we move forward in higher education and how the three segments work together. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Medina. Dr. Weber.
Yes, good morning. And Mr. Chair, thank you for obviously convening this group and wanting to do this select committee. Many of us have talked about it, and fortunately you came in and took the reins, and that's a great thing to do that. The master plan is really an amazing document, and it was amazing to me that it's a plan that never really was enacted into law. That's the funny part about it, and yet most of us throughout the state thought that it was. But it has governed oftentimes the things that we do and how we operate as three systems. California is unique in a lot of ways, and probably its most important way is in how it put together a higher ed system. As I've traveled around the world, everyone marvels at the system we have that has the potential to capture any student at any particular time, any Californian, in terms of where they are academically and the needs that they have, and provide them with education. We operated under a very strong premise that education would be the key piece of the linchpin that would hold all of California together, and that's been true. That we could provide opportunities for everyone at every point in their life. That learning was lifelong, and that we provided that opportunity for years and for individuals to come along. I think most of us value the three-tier system. I've worked in all three of them at some point in my life, and have basically taken advantage of the best that California had at that time. And so I think all of us have a tremendous amount of debt that we owe to all of the systems that educate us. There's probably no Californian that has actually not been affected by one of the systems, whether they have or their children or their relatives have benefited from California's higher ed system. And so I think to that extent we have something that's very special. We know we have something that needs to grow in time with the times itself. I think the goals and mission to educate every Californian that chooses to is a wonderful goal and something that we will probably hold very dear. How we accomplish that is going to be the challenge. But nonetheless, I'm glad we're here, and I'm grateful that we're not trying to do a bill to change it before we have a conversation, that we are going to have a process that is going to be thoughtful and take time and hear from all of the stakeholders, and then do what we need to do to strengthen our system. I don't think our system is broken and weak. In fact, it's probably the strongest higher ed system in the world, to be very honest. But at the same time, it can always be better. And we want to make sure that we are the folks who look at it and use those experts in the audience to do that. So I welcome this conversation. I welcome the time that we're going to spend together to address the issues that are really, really important to Californians. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weber, and thank you to my colleagues. I'm very grateful for the experience and the knowledge and the passion that you all, just as a subset of the whole committee, bring to this conversation, and I'm heartened by the comments that you all just made. Thank you for being here. So we're going to kick it off with an overview of higher education in California. I want to welcome Jennifer Kuhn, a Deputy Legislative Analyst for Education at the Legislative Analyst's Office, and thank you, Ms. Kuhn, for joining us today.
Thank you. Good morning. So you should have a handout in front of you entitled Overview for Higher Ed in California. If you need one, the sergeant has additional copies. As I walk through the handout this morning, I'm going to skip over some items for the sake of time, but I'm hoping that move through the hearing this morning, and as you move through the months to come, as you revisit and reprioritize potentially your higher ed system. So diving into the first page, it identifies the key ways the legislature can impact higher education. So arguably, and these roles are just as important and relevant today as they were back in 1960. So arguably, one of the most important roles for the legislature is defining the mission. The legislature both defines the mission for the entire system as well as for each of the segments. Another important role is setting eligibility expectations, who can access each of the segments. A third role is providing state support for higher education, as well as setting expectations for the cost of education, tuition levels, financial aid, and expectations regarding students' work and borrowing during school. A fourth role is holding both the segments accountable for fulfilling their mission, as well as the segments collectively responsible for fulfilling the mission of the entire system. Lastly, the legislature has an important role in creating a governance structure that promotes the effective management of each segment, as well as coordination among all the segments, public and private. Since this is the first hearing of the Select Committee, I was asked just to review what are the core components, the core tenets of the 1960 Master Plan, just to get you started off on the same page. Several of the components of the Master Plan were put into the Donohoe Act of 1960. Some were not and remain treated effectively as governing policy, guiding policy. You'll see from the review that many aspects of both the Donohoe Act and the Master Plan remain in place today. So one of the most important things the Donohoe Act did was to define the mission of each of the segments. So for community colleges, they designed them to provide basic skills instruction, workforce ed, lower division general education. The colleges were to provide workforce certificates, associate's degree, and help students transfer to the universities. CSU was to provide undergraduate and graduate education, bachelor's and master's degree, also focus on teaching credentials. UC was to do graduate instruction all the way through doctoral degrees, as well as be the research university for the state and do professional education. The master plan also set the eligibility targets, so who would be allowed to be eligible for each of the segments. And as you know, as designed, the community college would take any adult, regardless of prior achievement. CSU would draw its freshmen from the top 1/3 of high school graduates, UC from the top 1/8, and both university systems would take transfer students if they had completed their general education requirements with a minimum specified GPA. The master plan also, on page 3, sets certain cost expectations and funding expectations. So by design, the master plan said the community colleges would offer the lowest cost education, you see the highest cost education. State general fund support would be aligned accordingly, providing the least amount of support per community college student, the most support at UC. Master plan also set forth financial aid expectations. So prior to 1960, the state did have a financial aid program. It was relatively modest, provide mostly tuition assistance for students attending private schools. In legislation that was passed at the same time in the special session that created the Donohoe Act, this financial aid program was expanded notably, quadrupling the number of recipients, almost tripling the award amount. So in 1960, they envisioned financial aid as being able to have multiple objectives, promote student access, financially needy students would be able to go to college, promote student choice, so they'd be able to select among private or public universities, and also relieve pressure on the public segments. In the 1960s, the baby boomers were coming of college age. There was talk of a tidal wave entering college. So the master plan had this emphasis on creating capacity in higher education generally, using both the public and the private sector. The master plan, just on page 4 to highlight a couple more components of the master plan, the Donohoe Act created the CSU Board of Trustees. Prior to that time, CSU was under the purview of the State Board of Education. The UC Board of Regents predated 1960 by more than 100 some years, but the state created the Community College Board of Governors 7 years later. Since the creation of the governing boards, the state has delegated substantial authority to the governing boards. They manage enrollment, they allocate funding across the campuses, they set staffing and enrollment compensation policies, oversee building programs, and at the universities set tuition policies. The Donohoe Act also created the Coordinating Council for Higher Education, trusted it with statewide planning. On the Coordinating Council, there were 3 representatives from the community colleges, each of the 2 university segments, the private sector, and the state. So that's the master plan. That's more than half a century ago. So as the chair indicated, California's changed since 1960. So pages 4 and 5 just highlight briefly some of those key changes. As you can see from the chart on page 5, almost 80% of the traditional college-age population in 1960 was white. That share today is in 2015 was 31%. In 1960, the traditional college-age population, 12% were Hispanic. That's up to 46%. Of all adults in California, 44% in 1960 didn't have a high school diploma. That share is down to 17% in 2015. In 1960, 27% of adults had some college or a college degree, and in 2015, that was up to 62% of adults had some college or a college degree. Although not shown in the figure, I wanted to spend just a moment to highlight some changes in the economy. The data is a bit more problematic because there's been such notable changes in the classification of industry sectors. But what we know is in 1960, manufacturing was the largest sector, accounted for about a quarter of all jobs. It's down to about 10% today. The largest sector today is retail jobs. When you include restaurants, it's almost 20% of jobs in 2015. We know that the health and social service sector jobs are much greater today than in 1960, and that businesses and professional services jobs make up a larger sector today than then. The IT sector didn't exist in 1960, and many common jobs today, computer scientist, information officer, web designer, didn't exist in 1960. The higher education system has also changed since 1960, as you can see on page 6. The 3 public segments in 1960 together served about 200,000 FTE students. And in 2015, this was up to 1.8 million, so almost a 9-fold increase. When you compare that to the college-age population, it increased roughly 3-fold. There was an increase in the number of campuses, but even with 60 additional campuses, average enrollment at campuses increased at all of the segments significantly. As you can see at the bottom half of this table, we show core funding per student. For core funding, we look at both state support and tuition support. And you can see for the segments that in 2015, in inflation-adjusted terms, core funding is higher than in 1960. But you can also see that what's comprising that core funding has changed notably, with state support down and tuition support up. So for example, at UC, per student, state support is down about $10,000, and tuition support per student is up about $10,000. So given California's changed, the legislature obviously has made efforts to revise the master plan over the years. And I wasn't asked to give you a long litany of all the things the state has tried, but I was asked to look at recent developments that indicate the legislature has been rethinking, revisiting some of the core components of the master plan. One of the most notable recent developments has been the increasing overlap of mission of the segments. And you can see this both in efforts to allow community colleges to offer bachelor's degrees, as well as to have CSU offer doctoral degrees. Another notable development has been the expansion of eligibility and enrollment at the universities. So about a month ago, the state got the results of the freshman eligibility study. The last time the state had done a study was 10 years prior. What the study found is that CSU was drawing from the top 41% of high school graduates and CSU from the top 13.9%. So both beyond the master plan, eligibility pools, CSU is substantially beyond. The last few years, we've also seen enrollment increase at UC and CSU at the same time that there's been slight drops in high school enrollment and high school graduates. Even looking out for the next few years, there's very slow growth in the high school and college-age population, in stark contrast to what the state was seeing in the 1960s. Page 8 here, the state has also had some recent developments in expanding financial aid. For example, in 2013, it created the Middle Class Scholarship Program for UC and CSU students. In 2015, it created the Full-Time Student Success Grant Program for community college students. A year later, it expanded that program to include more community college students. A year later, 2017, just recently, the state created the Completion Grant Program to provide even more aid to community college students if they would take 15 units per term. Page 8, the state's also, the past few years, placed a much greater emphasis on student outcomes. So the state now requires each segment to report on key performance measures, persistence rates, graduation rates, units per degree. The legislature has been reviewing these performance results as part of its annual budget process. In the last few years, the state's also invested substantially more money into support programs. So for example, in 17-18, the state is providing $889 million for 9 community college student support programs. In 12-13, the state provided $243 million for that same collection of programs. Page 10. Just a couple more recent developments. Since 2010, both the state and the segments have made notable improvements in transfer, so in coordination, particularly among community colleges and CSU. So 2 particularly notable developments were the creation of the associate degree for transfer, and that students who had an associate degree for transfer could go to CSU, get their bachelor's degree, and do it within 2 additional years of work. While the state and the segments have made substantial improvement in some coordination areas, one might argue that the state's taken a step backwards on statewide planning. It defunded its statewide planning agency in 2011 and has yet to replace it with a vision and a structure for doing strategic planning on an ongoing basis. So the final few pages of the handout are sort of where to go from here, and it's just a list of questions that you might ask in the coming days and weeks as you think again about revisiting the master plan. I'm going to highlight just a few of them. So regarding mission, what is the basic primary objective of higher education in California? What should be the basic objectives of each segment? And how distinct should those missions be? And if a segment's mission is expanded, what might this mean for its other responsibilities as well as for the other segments? Regarding eligibility, how selective should UC and CSU be with transfer and freshman admissions? And in thinking about eligibility pools, to what extent should you take into account cost of education, student preparation, and student demand? Regarding tuition and financial aid, how much of the cost of education should students at each segment pay? Should you help them cover living costs? Should they be expected to work and borrow, and to what extent in college? To what extent should programs be about access for low-income students to attend college versus affordability so that middle-income students have an easier time affording college? Should the state simplify financial aid messaging, making it easier for students, consolidate state and institutional aid programs, and better think about how to coordinate state and federal aid programs? And finally, regarding accountability, do the state's current performance measures appropriately tap the legislature's goals for higher education? How should the state hold the segment accountable if it doesn't meet a performance expectation? Regarding governance, what authority should the state delegate to each of the governing boards? And regarding statewide planning, how should the state do this kind of planning? Should it resurrect or create a new planning body? Or should it have a new vision for divvying up those responsibilities among the education state agencies? So I know that was a whirlwind of the past, the present, and the future, but it was hopefully just able to set some stage for your future conversation. I'm happy to take questions on any issue I raised.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Kuhn. And colleagues, any questions or comments for Ms. Kuhn? Yes, Mr. Medina.
Just a question that comes to my mind. I think we've relied a lot on the master plan as being what moves us or what established, as you pointed out. How has it worked? Kind of my question. How has it worked over these some 50 years? You know, why has it worked well? Why hasn't it worked so well? If that's a very broad question, but we've put a lot of reliance on this master plan. You know, anytime we talk about higher education, that's where we go back. But it has been 50-some years, you know, and I don't want to exaggerate, but it's almost like, you know, we look at it as our constitution of higher education, but it's not a document that has changed.
Yeah, and as an analyst who doesn't do a scientific study of the state's experience, I can at least give you some reaction. I think our office has believed that it has set forth parameters that allow you to have productive conversations, that allow you to say, what do we expect of the segments? Do we know their mission? Do we think we have some idea of what that mission costs and how we can hold them accountable for undertaking it? So those are very productive things. They help you do your business of making policy and budget decisions. And although I think we treat it as this concrete document, they wrote it in 1960, clearly the legislature over the last several decades has treated it as an organic document. It helps us make decisions, but we need to make sure it's reflective of California today, what we're hearing, the challenges of students and others. So it hasn't, having said that, fundamentally reshaped the master plan tenets. It has tried to do things that have really been within more of the master plan tenets, which is like, let's improve transfer. That was set out by design, that students would be able to go from community colleges to CSU. Let's make sure that's working as well as it could be. I don't think you should feel beholden to its tenets. I think we would just encourage everybody in the conversation to consider all of the ramifications. It's great that you're doing it strategically and comprehensively, because as you change one piece, for example, just community colleges offering bachelor's degrees, it's going to have notable implications on the other things community colleges do, on CSU, potentially on transfer to UC, potentially on overall access, on capital outlay requests. So even something that seems like a discrete item has these notable implications potentially for the rest of higher education. So I'm sorry if that was long-winded.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and you know that just kind of emphasizes the importance. Oh, excuse me, Senator Allen.
I wanted to ask, just to get your, and unfortunately I can only stay for a little bit because the Senate has floor session in a little bit, but can you reflect, this is not the first time the legislature has tried to take a exam, you know, try to take a 30,000-foot examination of the master plan. Have you had a chance to review some of the previous legislative investigations, and can you reflect a little bit upon, some interesting lessons learned from those experiences, why it was that nothing much seems to have come out of them, you know, what recommendations you may have for us entering into this comprehensive process based on any examination you may have had of some of the more recent previous legislative investigations in this area?
So as you know, there have been multiple efforts to revisit, and the groups that have come together have had many dozens and dozens of recommendations. And the bulk of those recommendations candidly didn't end up in legislation. So it's a great question. How can we make this as productive a process as possible? It probably starts with sort of spending time to think about what are the problems. So what do we think we need to achieve 3, 5, 10 years from now? And I think sometimes there's been like a visceral feeling there's problems in higher ed without a concrete understanding of, well, what are they? What can we do? Mm-hmm. I think in the cases where there has been a concrete listing of problems, legislation has been adopted to address them. I think the other main issue, which is just going to be a perennial challenge, is how do you get a system as decentralized and extensive as California to work together to come to an agreement on the problems, particularly problems that cross-cut segments. For example, if you would like data to see if a high school student ends up completing post-secondary and getting a job in their field, that requires massive coordination. Do you have agreement there's a problem, that data should be achieved and should be used for the following purposes? And how much money, time, effort will it take to actually build that system?
That's part of why we had CPEC, right, to help coordinate knowledge, understanding data. Have you found that the dismantling of CPEC and the lack of any adequate replacement in some other form has been damaging to our ability to really understand the trends at play that could inform this debate moving forward?
I think we understand that there were issues with CPEC, and I think partly it's because California has very strong governing boards and already has lots of decision makers involved in higher ed. And I think there was a growing feeling that CPEC wasn't a powerful enough player to participate in this conversation. Having said that, I would suggest that statewide planning has suffered a bit because the state hasn't quite figured out how to replace CPEC, even if it's not a state agency, even if it's just an identification of what were the core functions that we want to still do. Is it reviewing every new campus, every new program, setting enrollment targets? And then how can we do that? Maybe the budget committees or the education committees want to take over some of those responsibilities. Maybe it's our agency or the Department of Finance or the California Department of Ed. But I would suggest identifying what functions have not been done well. And I think statewide, just planning. How many campuses do you want? Where do you want them? Even much more subtle than that, where do you want the next new academic building? Academic buildings these days are very expensive. And there hasn't been really any state-level oversight of where the next one will be.
Right. I mean, I think the challenge is I don't think that the legislature has a role to play in this, but I do think it's important for there to be someplace, you're absolutely right. There are these very competent siloed boards that are working well within their own lanes, running the community college system, the CSU system, the UC system, K through 12. But there doesn't seem to be a place for us to really get together and talk about how well coordinated things are. And of course, for students, that's vitally important. I mean, ultimately, these systems are so inextricably entwined, and students are moving between them. I mean, we've got an enormous problem on our hands in terms of transfers and transfer vitality. I mean, certainly there are lots of students who make it through the system successfully, but the data, when you look at those students who show up at community college fully intending to transfer to CSU or UC, who actually make it and then end up succeeding with a 4-year degree, is pretty paltry. There's some great success stories in and around our system, but I worry sometimes that we're not having a robust enough discussion about that, and I'm hoping that's going to be part of the conversation. But I mean, have you seen any? Can you comment a little bit on the transfer challenge that we have through our system? Have you seen any data as you're preparing for this that offers some insight?
When the state passed the legislation in 2010 and 2012 to try to improve transfer, improve student completion at the community colleges, and get transfer to work more seamlessly with CSU, we were asked effectively after about 3 years to start monitoring it every 2 years thereafter. So we've done a number of reports. We've seen notable improvement in the coordination of the colleges with CSU. CSU is continuing to report that more students are transferring with the degrees. CSU's community colleges are reporting far more students are getting this associate degree for transfer. I think that's an example of where state and segmental efforts have worked really good in concert and produced what the legislature and the segments and students are all appreciating. So even though there was a decade worth of concern before the legislature passed these pieces of legislation in the early 2010s, I think the state has begun to see some very positive results from it. Okay, all right. And then that's great. Final question is, can you comment a little bit? There seems to be a feeling, I think some I don't know what it is, misunderstandings or resentments in the legislature about our public higher educational system. I think sometimes our system does a bad job of telling its story and all the successes that are out there, and it's constantly being pummeled with bad news that are oftentimes focused on areas that are really, rather small in the grand scheme of things. Do you have any thoughts on that? As you've been preparing for this hearing, do you think there are things that the higher educational system ought to be doing better in terms of the way it engages with the legislature, so as to have a more collaborative, productive interchange and engagement with the legislature? I hope that as an office we can be helpful over the coming years for you all as you work through those more detailed conversations. I had argued just a moment ago we all should be starting with a clear set of problems that we're trying to tackle. And I do sometimes struggle with, there's a lot of conversation and sort of visceral reaction. College is expensive, debt loads are high, students aren't completing on time. But it's not entirely clear, are these administrative problems? Are they messaging problems? Are they strategic planning problems? And when you get down another level and say, well, how are we going to resolve that? It becomes a very complicated conversation. Just covering living costs alone, you could talk about for hours. Well, how should students live? What would we expect of them? Should they work? What if they're an athlete or a musician? So it becomes far more complicated very quickly. So again, this is just to say we appreciate that you're tackling the general notion of where do we want to start in terms of what we truly think are documented problems today, where there's this not a clean, but a keen state role in terms of addressing those problems. And I'm sorry that I'm not able to articulate them, because we live, as you do, in the midst of these news stories. It's not always clear exactly what the state role and solution should be.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to exploring some of these things. I think we need to dig in deep on transfers, and we should be transferring so many more students system-wide, given all the the socioeconomic needs of the state. I'd love to talk more about this whole interchange between Sacramento and the higher ed segments. I'm just excited about where this discussion is going to go.
Thanks, Senator. Mr. Medina?
Kind of to pick up a little bit on where Senator Allen began, it seems like to me as chair of higher education that our systems work well independently of each other, as he said. Each one with a governing system, each one with a mission, each one with working on their own particular mission. Where I see as chair of higher education, something that's greatly missing is simple questions, as you pointed out, as where are our teachers going to come from? Where are our future doctors going to come from? Do we have enough attorneys? How do we make those decisions? It comes to the legislature in the form of bill ideas. We have folks on this dais who bring ideas forward. And to me, as a chair of higher education, minus any kind of overarching coordinating system, it becomes a free-for-all in the legislature. Yeah. As you pointed out, where will the next campus be built? Where will the next medical school be built? Where should it be built? How do we address the shortage of teachers? How do we address the shortage of doctors in different parts of the state of California with no system to address those questions? No system to say, is it still the mission of CSU to produce teachers across the state of California? No overarching question to say, where do we need doctors? Are we meeting the needs of doctors throughout the whole state of California? So minus any kind of system in place, it's pretty tough, rough and tumble to make those decisions.
And I would just emphasize, because this is perennial, this is California sort of politics as unfolding before you. So you have strong governing bodies, and they are entrusted with taking care of their systems. That's what they're hired to do. They're hired to make sure UC runs well. So what would be a state perspective? What would get this a different layer up, which would say, well, this isn't just about making sure UC works well. It's about making sure Californians are provided the best possible opportunities. So then how do you do that? So the state's tried a number of ways. It hasn't worked very well. At this point, the legislature's taken on the job. The legislature's powerful, right? So that's a good thing. So you have these powerful boards, you have a powerful legislature. You're getting at, well, but the legislature isn't really designed, right? We represent you represent districts. So who would do the job? And I just take a moment to say this because it's a really key issue. Who should do the job? And if you want somebody beyond the legislature to do the job, you have to make them powerful enough to be able to insert their voice in an already very crowded venue.
Thank you, Ms. Kuhn. And one thing I did want to, I guess, bring to folks' attention is two documents. Senator Allen had asked if there's kind of an overview of previous efforts to review the master plan. And the LAO 7 or 8 years ago, 8 years ago in 2009, put out a great report, The Master Plan at 50, Assessing California's Vision for Higher Education. That gives a very high-level review of the different attempts to review the master plan over the last 57 years. And we're going to have this available on my website. We'll have a tab for the Select Committee that'll have different documents on there, including this and including the kind of testimony that you gave us ahead of time today, which I really appreciate. That really sets a great kind of framework for the conversation we'll be having over the next couple of years. So if folks at home or in the audience who haven't had a chance to see that, definitely go on my website and go to the Select Committee on the Master Plan tab, and that and other documents will be available for folks. So just want to say thank you very much for participating today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. We look forward again to being as helpful as possible in the months to come.
Thank you. So I'd like to introduce Chancellor Oakley, Chancellor of the California Community Colleges. And thanks so much for joining us today, Chancellor Oakley.
Well, thank you for having me, and good morning. Good to see everyone. First, let me begin by thanking you, Mr. Chair, for convening us and for having this very important conversation. It is something that's near and dear to my heart. I am a native Californian and a product of the California Master Plan, so I wouldn't be here but for the coordination that does happen between our systems. So I'm going to try to cover as much ground as possible, then save enough time for some questions. You have my written comments. I won't go through all of them, but I'll try to highlight some key points. First, as I begin, I can't help but think that the California Master Plan was meant to serve Californians. And we are living in a moment in time when we are considering whether or not some Californians are going to have equal access to our higher education system. So I can't help but think that as Californians, as we talk about the master plan, that we make clear that we serve every student in California regardless of immigration status. And so I know I join with my colleagues, Tim White and Janet Napolitano, when we say that we are going to keep our doors open to every Californian. And I hope that we can count on you to help us make that clear. Having said that, the master plan for higher education has always been committed to open access, tuition affordability, and I'll highlight the word tuition affordability. I'll come back to that later. And academic preparation. Those are working well in the California community college system. Our system is designed to try and reach all Californians. We're not quite reaching all Californians, and I'll talk about that later, but it is designed to reach all Californians. Currently, we are serving more than 2.1 million students from across the state. We're in 114 communities across the state. We feel we are in the best position to really get the temperature of the state of California and the workforce. And that's how you designed us and why you designed us that way. We reflect the diversity of this state. I won't go into all the details. You know what the diversity of this state looks like. We reflect that diversity, and we're proud of that diversity. In terms of age, our students are about 1/3 are between the ages of 20 and 24. About 1/4 are between the ages of 25 to 39, and 16% are over the age of 40. So we serve a wide spectrum, and remember Medina, there's still time for you to come back to the community colleges. 42% of our students are first-generation students. Again, we are the gateway to higher education for first-generation students, students of color, low-income students. I'll say this again later on, but we are proud to be able to say that we serve the top 100% of students. That's right. Tuition. Tuition has always been the lowest in the nation, beginning at $0 per unit to now we're at $46 per unit. Still by far the lowest tuition in the country. So we should be proud of that. It is a success. We also have what we call the Board of Governors fee waiver program, which ensures that all of our low-income students pay no fees at all. So currently, there's about 1 million students in the California community colleges that do not pay tuition. That is by far the most comprehensive and the biggest free tuition program in the nation. We should be proud of that as well. Community colleges provide a strong academic foundation for students. Close to 1/3 of UC graduates and over half of CSU graduates started at the community colleges, much to your point, Senator Allen. And just so I pause on that to get to one of your questions, and I'm sure we'll get to that later. The strategic vision for the California community colleges, which we just published, we are challenging ourselves, committing ourselves to increasing transfer to CSU and UC by 35% annually. We feel that that's what the state needs from our system. Now, having said that, if we accomplish that, there is no room at CSU or UC to get those students in. So that's a challenge for this body. How are we going to create the transfer capacity that is needed if community colleges and K-12 are successful at moving more students toward the CSU and the UC? So those things are all succeeding. We've got low tuition, we've got universal access, we've got tremendous faculty and staff who day in, day out do everything possible to serve our students and do so at the lowest per student funding of all the systems. So our neediest students receive the lowest per student funding almost in the nation. So the master plan reflected our best thinking in 1960. And I'll highlight that, the best thinking of 1960. It no longer reflects the reality of 2017. And I think you all are very, very aware of that. Much has changed in those years. In 1960, only 16% of working-age adults had a college degree. Today, the college credential has really become the default to get into the workforce. It's no longer a high school diploma. So much has changed in the economy. California's social and economic needs have changed significantly. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, it projects that by 2030, 38% of all jobs will require at least a bachelor's degree. And for students with only a high school diploma, today's economy is unforgiving. It discriminates against individuals who don't have a college credential. When adjusted for inflation, the wages for workers who have not attended college are much less today than they were in the year 2000. High school graduates without at least some college under their belt now just hold 18% of good-paying jobs, jobs that pay at least $35,000 to $45,000 per year, which is down from 28% in 1991. So as you can see, there is a clear connection between income or wage gap in California and education attainment, particularly higher education attainment. And that gap grows year by year by year. So part of the challenge we face today is that in 1960, there was not an expectation that everybody needed a college credential to participate meaningfully in the workforce. You know, when I was young, and it's sort of scary to look at this dais and think that I'm older than most of you, but when I was young, growing up in Southern California, one could come out of high school and go to work for Northrop or the Long Beach Naval Shipyard or McDonnell Douglas. That economy is gone. There is an expectation now that workers have some sort of college credential. So that has fundamentally changed from 1960. In addition, we need to pair our historical commitment to access, which, as I've mentioned, is a great achievement, with a new commitment to student success. Attending college is not enough anymore. It's a wonderful experience. It's been great for many, many of our students to have the opportunity to attend college, but we need to ensure that they finish with a credential. I believe we also need to rethink the eligibility and pools and transfer ratios to reflect the degree of production, the needs of degree production we need today. And that conversation has been happening between our system and the UC and the CSU, but again, to a point that was made earlier, there is no coordinating body that's really looking at what the needs of the state are or should be and reflecting that back to our system so that we can think about what kind of degree production we should be focused on and how to make that happen between the three systems. Our financial aid policies need to be re-examined. Our policies should respond to the true cost of attending college. The Institute for College Access and Success recently looked at the affordability of colleges and universities in California, and although there's a problem across the board, I think most people were surprised by the fact that it is more costly for a student to attend a community college in the Sacramento area than it is to attend the University of California, Davis. And why is that? Because our financial aid policies are geared toward full-time enrollment in the CSU or the UC. They're not geared toward covering the total cost of attendance in the community colleges. The low cost of tuition has masked the true cost of attending college. And so many of the challenges we face are due to the fact that our students have to work in order to go to school, in order to afford housing, in order to afford transportation, books, and everything else that goes into attending college. And in the Cal Grant system, I know there was made mention that we have made improvements to the Cal Grant system for community colleges, and we welcome those. But if you consider that those changes, for example, the full-time student success grant or the completion grant that was recently enacted, only students who are participating, who are eligible for Cal Grant, can receive those. And that's a very small number in the community colleges because only a small number of our students qualify for Cal Grant aid. So while there have been improvements, we still are leaving the majority of California community college students behind. They do not qualify for the Cal Grant program. The master plan created clear structures and segments, and I think we work well together. But as has been said, my job is to protect and defend and advocate for the interest of my system, not to always think about how does my system work with the other systems to ensure that we're meeting the needs of California. That's certainly what I believe, but I do think we need some other mechanism to help us coordinate the efforts and our investments. We certainly believe, and I hope you do as well, that the California community colleges are the engine of social mobility. That has been shown most recently in many studies that show what the value of great public higher education is to a state's populace. We open the doors to many, many students who wouldn't otherwise qualify to go into higher education. We put them in a place where they can now receive a credential, and we give them the opportunity to have great wage gain. That is the magic of what we do. Our challenge is that too few of our students make it to their desired goal. And despite strong focus on improving equity, our colleges still struggle with persistent achievement gaps. That is something that we want to be very clear about. We're far away from doing what we need to do to close those gaps. And I say we because I think that includes not only the leaders of our system, but our policymakers in our state. We have to put a clear focus on closing these achievement gaps and doing what's necessary in our communities to make that happen. So only 48% of community college students identified were identified as receiving a certificate or degree, achieved that goal within 6 years. That's taking far too long, and we recognize that. Students who do complete their associate's degree goals take a long time to do so, and right now they're averaging about 5.2 years to receive what many of us consider a 2-year degree. There are many reasons for that. I've mentioned some of them already in terms of going full-time, going part-time versus full-time. And many of our older and working age adults are being left behind at a time when post-recession, many working age adults don't have a college credential and they have been displaced permanently from the workforce. We need to double down our efforts to reach out to those working age adults and give them the opportunity to receive some sort of credential that will allow them to more meaningfully participate in the economy. We have seen the effects of this problem throughout the country in the news every single day. We have a lot of disaffected working age adults who do no longer believe that they can succeed in this economy. So as we look forward, I think there's a lot of things that have been done well. that I think we need to continue to build on. There's been an influx of funding to support student matriculation services under the Student Success and Supports Program. There's been a focus on closing achievement gaps. There's been a focus on improving remedial instruction through investment in the Basic Skills Transformation Grant and Basic Skills Program. And we have certainly done a much better job of aligning career education to the workforce through the Strong Workforce Program. So thank you for all of those investments. These investments have moved the system to think more strategically about evaluating our performance and student outcomes. We pioneered the Student Success Scorecard. No other system, no other community college system in the country has a scorecard in every single one of its colleges that tells the public how students are doing at that college. That is a remarkable act of transparency. We've also established a salary surfer so that students can go online and determine what kind of wages the particular career that they're going into earns in California. And the Chancellor's Office Institutional Effectiveness Partnership Initiative works with colleges on goal setting and using data indicators to evaluate our programs. So, a lot has happened. We've come a long way. What else can we do? Recently, through your efforts, we received funding to launch the Guided Pathways Framework for the California Community Colleges. We feel that this is a very effective means of coordinating all 114 colleges under one framework and creating clear and structured pathways for all of our students. It allows us to have common dialogue around all 114 colleges and put a focus on data and put a focus on closing achievement gaps. We also have had much success in promoting College Promise programs throughout the state. Over 56 exist now. These are great opportunities for communities to rally around each and every student in those communities, and we should continue to support those initiatives. We are improving assessment and placement, and thank you to Member Irwin for her work in this area. But we are clearly focused on using better data, and particularly high school performance data, to inform where a student should be placed in college, and we are working toward eliminating the use of standardized placement exams. And we are clearly focused on data-driven decision-making. This is a cultural change for us, but we're seeing great improvement throughout our system. One comment I will make, and one suggestion I will make, is that we do not have a common student data system in California. That is a real challenge for us. So if there's anything that we could do, a student data system would be wonderful. Because right now, we are relying on data sharing agreements between K-12 districts, community colleges, sometimes the CSU campus. We don't have any real way of looking at students and how they progress from pre-K into the workforce. That's leaving a lot of information on the table that we could use to better align our systems to ensure that when students come to us, we're tracking them and we know how to better support their progress. So I hope that we can take a hard look at how we can develop a student data system. I think the master plan established roles and responsibilities for our higher education segments, but we have to stop looking at it as segments. We are one public education system, and I hope that we can put our focus on looking at the systems more like one system and doing our best to serve the needs of California. So we commit ourselves to helping you look at these issues throughout the upcoming years and certainly make our staff available to you, and we hope that we look forward to a very productive outcome, and thank you again for bringing us together.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Oakley. And before I open it up to colleagues for questions or comments, I just want to recognize the colleagues that have joined us. So thank you, Assemblymember Kiley, Assemblymember Irwin, Assemblymember Lowe, and Dr. Arambula for joining us at the hearing. And with that, I want to open up to colleagues for questions. I'd ask that they keep them as brief as possible as we try to stay on schedule. But any questions for Chancellor Oakley? Mr. Kiley.
Thanks very much for the testimony, Chancellor. I was hoping you could address the remediation issue, which is clearly, linked quite strongly to a lot of the challenges you addressed, and whether you've seen best practices at community colleges across the state as far as working with secondary schools and those throughout the K-12 system to try to address this challenge.
Yes, there's been quite a lot of effort and quite a lot of work put in, particularly in the last 5 years, that I think has shown great promise. First of all, the improvement in how we place students. First of all, we have been placing students in remedial courses that did never belonged in remedial courses. So we're doing a much better job of placing students where they need to be. We're also taking a hard look at how we treat students in remedial courses. There's a lot of work happening now to give those students momentum by putting them in credit-bearing courses and giving them additional support or co-requisites so that they can continue to make momentum. We're also deploying technology much better, ensuring that we are better diagnosing what the skills gaps are and focusing our efforts there. So there is a lot of work going on. I think it is an area that we should continue to invest in because I think it holds great promise for our first-generation students and all students. So I think the basic skills transformation grants have been showing great improvement, and now that we're also working with the California State University system on these remediation redesigns, we think we'll even have better success.
Chancellor Oakley, you touched on something that my knowledge of the master plan, and the reason why the master plan was created was, in my understanding, that there was contention between the three systems, and that the master plan was a way of putting out, writing, making clear what the missions of the three systems were. And now we are here in 2017, and we're re-looking at it. But the reason that we got the master plan, I believe, is that you had three higher educational systems, and it was not clear what the objective mission of each system was. So the master plan, my understanding, made clear that post-higher education, the doctoral program, would stay within UC, I believe. Then we've changed that. CSU has gotten the EDD. Right. I believe CSU now gives a doctorate in nursing as well, right? Education, the teachers would be, teaching credentialing would be part of CSU and UC, the teacher credentialing program. Medicine would be under the preview of UC. Those were the things that were, I think, those were part of the things that were established or settled by the master plan. And my understanding, I was 7 years old in 1960, but in looking back, it was my understanding that those were things that needed to be settled because there was disagreement among the three systems as to what each one would do. Now, 50-some years later, we see, we see, as you mentioned, the community college offering bachelor's degree in certain areas. And we see efforts to expand that. We see efforts to expand a four-year degree in nursing to the community college. We see efforts to expand bachelor degree, as you mentioned, in the community college. But as I sit here, and as we have talked individually and as legislators, I think we need to get back to make it clear what it is we expect each segment to do.
I agree. And the challenge we face today is that even though we're all discussing this, the economy is demanding something different. And so we're struggling to figure out how to respond to the economy and to the workforce needs. So we have seen the growth of bachelor's degrees in community colleges, focus on workforce needs. So I think the choice is either we fully fund the capacity of the systems to deal with their individual missions and respond to the workforce needs, or we allow the systems to morph or be more malleable to respond to the workforce needs. So if there's not going to be enough capacity in the CSU to fully support all the workforce needs in California, then yes, we should allow community colleges to fill that void. Because if we don't, somebody else will. Just because we can't fund the capacity doesn't mean somebody else isn't going to figure out a way to take those students, and they are today. So I think those are the two choices. I prefer the choice of fully funding the missions that exist and focusing the segments on doing the job that they were created for in the master plan. But if we can't do that, then we have to find other ways of serving the workforce need. And I think coming back to the legislature every time that there's a workforce need is not the most efficient way. So either we state that publicly in whatever revision of the master plan, or I think we need to fully fund the mission of the three segments.
Thank you, Chancellor Oakley. I wanted to first say I grew up 2 blocks away from the first community college in Fresno City College,
Right.
and quite proud of Carol Goldsmith, who's the current president.
Yes.
You know, I wanted to focus my comments on the provocative statement you had, that the master plan was our best thinking in 1960, but it doesn't reflect the reality of today, especially when we heard earlier that the master plan was referenced to the Constitution. And as many of us know, we needed many amendments to work with
Right.
that living document to ensure that we could have women on this panel and that they could vote and participate in what we do now. So my question really I want to focus on when there are these regional deficiencies in workforce that are identified and proven and not being met by the current master plan and higher education system. How best can we as a legislature ensure that we're preparing the workforce for the 21st century? And how can we help to support the current system that we have by giving you some of the tools to succeed?
Well, I think there has to be, well, has to be is a strong word. There should be a way for the state to fully study and recognize the workforce needs of the regions. We have that to some degree, but it's being done region by region, or there's some organizations like PPIC and others who are trying to do this work. But there has to be an organization within, whether the legislature, executive branch, somewhere where we are taking a hard look at the workforce needs of the state and then reflecting them back to the systems with goals for the systems to accomplish. And then there should be an opportunity to discuss those goals with the legislature as you develop your budget and determine what are the priorities. What are the priorities for the state? What are the priorities for the workforce? What do we need to focus on to ensure that the state remains economically viable? And that has to be done by region, because we all know that this state operates by regions. The economies are very different in the various regions, and the needs are different. You know, part of this comes down to funding. The other part, though, comes down to clarity of mission. What do you want the segments to accomplish? And be as clear as you can be. So then, you know, the system leaders can be as clear as we can be within our systems. I mean, we respond to the needs that we think exist within California, the needs that come to us, which may or may not be the true needs of the state. But we are responding on the ground. We have not had the opportunity to really look at the 35,000-foot level and determine how to best align ourselves to meet the needs of the entire state.
A follow-up question, if I may. I may not get the numbers exactly right. There's 120-ish community colleges.
114.
There's 20-something CSUs and
23.
maybe 11 UCs.
10 UCs.
Like I said. my point that I'm trying to get to is...
But we'd welcome more campuses.
Many within my community struggle because they're place-bound.
Yes.
And community colleges have done a great job of making sure that we can address those regional deficiencies. How do we better support the higher education system to make sure that all of California are having opportunities and not people who are just located closer to the centers of the higher education system?
That is a challenge because we have some parts of the state that are saturated with higher education institutions. I worked at Long Beach City College, LA County, and there you could throw a rock and hit 3 community colleges. And we have several CSUs. There are some parts of the state, such as you referenced, that have very little access, and most of our students are place-bound. I mean, the majority of our students who attend our public institutions attend in their region. And particularly if you're talking about low-income students or communities of color, even more of an issue. So I think we need to take a hard look at areas of the state that have grown tremendously in population, that have tremendous need in terms of the need to reach greater higher education attainment. And I think we need to make those priorities. I think in your community, I think the colleges and universities in your community are doing a great job in the Central Valley of trying to organize themselves. How can we incentivize that organizing? How can we incentivize the CSU and the community colleges and the K-12 districts and the UC working together to anchor that community and incentivize them to serve people in that community? I think that should be the first priority. That's a concept that we used in Long Beach to develop the Long Beach College Promise. You know, we wanted to ensure that people in our community had access to the highest quality education possible. So I think we need to find ways to incentivize that and to ensure that there's adequate funding to serve that community. I mean, if you think about this in terms of the way we look at healthcare, I mean, you know, we sometimes penalize hospitals that serve the lowest income population. We do something very similar in higher education. We make it very difficult for low income communities to afford going to college. In some cases, once they get to the UC or other private colleges, there are resources there, but getting them there is a challenge.
Thank you. Thank you, Chancellor Oakley. Really appreciate the conversation. Looking forward to more. And next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Castro, President of the California State University, Fresno. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Castro.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chair Berman and members of the committee, and thank you to my higher education colleagues and fellow panelists. Chancellor White intended to be here today. I know he very much wanted to come, but unfortunately, he was injured over the weekend. He's going to be okay, but he's not able to travel right now. So in the meantime, it's my honor to pinch hit for him and represent the California State University on his behalf. For those of you who may not know my story, I was born and raised in Hanford, just south of Fresno in the San Joaquin Valley. And I'm the grandson of farm workers who immigrated from Mexico about 100 years ago. My great-grandfather actually helped to build the Santa Fe Railroad. And like so many attending California's colleges and universities, I was the first in my family to earn a bachelor's degree. My public university education and UC Berkeley and Stanford University degrees altered the trajectory of my life, and it gives me the opportunity to begin to realize my own potential, and it set me on the path to eventually lead me back home to California State University, Fresno, as its 8th president. I also like to tell Chancellor White's story, and not just because he attended and graduated from Fresno State, but because his story demonstrates how a first-generation immigrant in this state can rise to the top of his field through hard work and the opportunities provided to him at the community colleges, California State University, and the University of California. Countless California success stories are being written today as hundreds of thousands of community college, CSU, and UC students, many the first in their families to set foot on a college or university campus, create their own path. And in the process, they help to strengthen California's economy. They are the next generation of leaders in California. That we have so many first-generation students is amazing and remarkable. It affirms our philosophy that talent exists in every household, regardless of income. It is also something that we have come to expect in California, a literal first-in-class public higher education system. And we have enhanced that public system by working closely with California's extraordinary independent colleges and universities, powerhouses of research and knowledge creation like USC and Stanford. That, I believe, is the consequence of the California Master Plan for Higher Education adopted 5 decades ago. It's important to ground these conversations that can sometimes get very abstract, with the immediate human consequences. The people in this room would not be here without their California higher education, nor would the millions of students and alumni who have their own California higher education success story. So this is what the master plan got right. The master plan created a dynamic, high-quality system with multiple points of entry, serving a great variety of student needs. The differentiation between our systems means that we can each tailor our academic program offerings to our particular cohort of students. This also means that the wraparound services we offer can be targeted to provide, as Chancellor White likes to say, individualized education at scale. The CSU understands and embraces our role within the higher education framework. We know that California faces a drought of 1 million bachelor's degrees by 2025, and the CSU has a plan through Graduation Initiative 2025 that will help more students graduate with high-quality degrees sooner. And this will help alleviate that bachelor's degree drought. Indeed, the CSU is well placed to address at least half that drought. But we need a more robust commitment from the state, and we need to have an honest conversation about steady enrollment growth, something I'll return to later. But back to what we're doing right. As you may know, half the teachers in the state earn their credentials through the CSU. And that has been a long point of pride for our system. In fact, Fresno State prepares more teachers than any other public university in California. But not as well known is that more than half of all California's bachelor's degrees in agriculture, public administration, engineering, criminal justice, and business are earned at the CSU. And on occasion, as with our highly regarded education, nursing, and physical therapy programs, we have stepped in to offer applied doctorate degrees in high-need areas where there is a clearly demonstrated workforce need. The impact of the CSU is magnified by the fact that we serve a student population that resembles California. In fact, 2/3 of bachelor's degrees earned by Latinos or Latinas in this state are earned at the CSU, 2/3. The CSU system, like our state, has no ethnic or racial majority. And the largest plurality, again, is among Latino and Latina students. And the CSU, through Graduation Initiative 2025, has committed to closing racial, ethnic, and economic achievement gaps. The CSU serves California's communities, and we serve them well. That is our mission, our privilege, and our source of pride. It is also our responsibility. And accordingly, we have set goals, including those contained in Graduation Initiative 2025, to contribute to the state's needs while examining our policies and processes to identify how we can continuously improve. Yes, the California Master Plan for Higher Education has served our state well. However, as has been pointed out this morning, planners 50 years ago didn't anticipate everything that has occurred over time. And there are two things that I want to point out today that I believe are important. One is partnerships and collaborations across the education continuum. I don't think those were fully anticipated. And then two is the rising demand for higher education. I see it especially in the San Joaquin Valley, where the population is growing rapidly, in the Inland Empire, and I know there are other parts of California where that's the case as well. But starting with partnerships, I want to give you one example. With generous support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others, Fresno State has made unprecedented progress in building partnerships across educational sectors to plan an improved K-16 college pipeline, now called the Central Valley Promise. Assemblymember Arambolo was there with us when we launched that program. The Promise is an intentioned response to the relatively low college-going rate in the Central Valley of California, with the first phase being in Fresno County. Fresno State, together with K-12 and community college partners, has capitalized on shared initiatives in instructional technology to design a multifaceted plan to increase college completion rates in the region. The Central Valley Promise is a community-wide effort to promote college as a viable option for youth in the region. The promise ensures that if children and their parents pledge to do what it takes in middle and high school to prepare, college will be there for them in the future, guaranteed. And in addition, the first semester, and in a few cases more than the first semester at a community college, will be free. Significantly enhancing the college-going culture and improving the college completion rate in the Central Valley will fundamentally change the notion of educational equity in our traditionally underserved region. And Fresno is not alone. 17 CSU campuses have built admissions-related partnerships with community colleges or high schools, many under the name of College Promise. These programs are not exactly alike. Each campus works with its local community, school districts, community colleges, University of California, private nonprofit colleges, cities, and employers to figure out the right mix of rigorous standards, expanded opportunities, and individualized support. CSU campuses are natural regional players. Given our number and distribution throughout the state, 23, and the fact that CSU often serves place-bound students who learn, live, work, and raise families in their local communities. 90% of the students I serve at Fresno State are from the Central Valley. And 80% of our graduates stay in the Central Valley, and that happens throughout the system at our CSU campuses. We also have one of the top high schools in California co-located on our campus at Fresno State, and there are high schools at Cal State Dominguez Hills, Los Angeles, and Pomona. We are also doing critical work on the statewide system-to-system level. The community college system is a critical access point to higher education, as it is open to all California high school graduates. And community colleges are a crucial partner for us in the CSU. In fact, more than a third of our undergraduates are transfer students who are now pursuing their bachelor's degrees. At Fresno State alone, 36% of new students in our fall entering class are community college transfer students, and that has been increasing dramatically over the last few years. Recognizing the significant number of community college students we receive, the CSU has worked together with the California community colleges to develop associate degree for transfer agreements. ADT programs are shining examples of working across segments to provide clear pipelines for students to earn degrees in 120 units while completing their university degree in a seamless and timely way. So regional and system-to-system partnerships are critical, but creating pipelines only makes sense if those pipelines lead to a degree and a career. And you've heard from the LAO, and the CSU openly acknowledges this, that more than 1/3 of California's graduating high school students are ready and eligible to start at one of our campuses. We're celebrating that. The eligibility study's findings that 41% of high school graduates are fully eligible for CSU admission is something that we are proud of. It means that more and more of our students throughout California are academically preparing themselves to attend college. But it also raises the questions about serving these first-time freshman students while still offering robust pathways for our transfer students. There are two ways to respond to this. First, the CSU could become more selective, changing the profile of the students we serve. Or second, we as a state can revise our 5-decade-old ideas about who should go to college and earn a bachelor's degree. And I think there is much to commend the idea that a better educated citizenry is in California's economic and social best interest. Ultimately, as legislators, you are in a strong position to determine whether we can fund a plan that would support California higher education, California economic mobility, and California social progress into the next 50 years. Fresno State and the CSU will continue to do our part. We are finding better ways to address entering students' skills gaps, ways that don't involve zero credit remedial or developmental education. We are moving away from make it or break it placement exams and taking a more expansive view of students' skills and qualifications. We are leveraging technology to help guide and track students throughout their academic careers and gleaning information from these systems to inform decision-making, identifying strategies to invest limited resources for the maximum benefit. And finally, we are addressing administrative and financial burdens that may impede student success, and will continue to foster a sense of belonging on campus for all of our students. So, with your help, including robust funding for enrollment, facilities, and student services, I am certain that we will give today's and tomorrow's students the opportunity to fully utilize their extraordinary talents and to fulfill their dreams as California's next generation of leaders. I thank you again for convening this hearing, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Castro. With that, open up to colleagues for any questions or comments. Dr. Rainbow?
No, I just have a comment if I can. I'm going to be a proud Valley resident for a second here. While you may be our 8th president, you're by far our best. And
Thank you.
It really is showing in how we are getting national recognition at Fresno State. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that Fresno State is now ranked the 17th best higher education institution in our nation in a recent national rankings. And it's much to the success that you have been fostering and how we really are becoming a place where all students have a chance. And so while 70+% of students who go to Fresno State are first in their generation to attend, we are showing tremendous progress. And it's much because you are a servant leader and you are the example that many of them aspired to become. Thank you for coming here today.
Thank you, Assemblyman, and thank you for your strong continued support of Fresno State and for all of higher education. Thank you.
Mr. Medina?
I want to, when it sits here in front of me, the composition of the higher education system in the state of California from 1960 to 2015, which is in front of me,
Yeah.
from 12% Latino to 46% Latino
Yes.
in those intervening 50 years. So I want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
As you said, Dr. Castro, everyone I think in this room, on this dais, is here, I believe, because of our higher educational system in the state of California. In my family, very much the case. I am the son of an immigrant who came to the state of California and graduated from San Jose State, then college, now university. The first CSU in the state of California.
Yes, that's
a
right.
CSU that was created to prepare teachers.
Yes.
And I believe it was called San Jose Teachers College
Yeah.
at one point.
Yeah.
So my father graduated from there. It was my time to go to school, and I graduated from UC Riverside.
Yes.
My two brothers graduated from Sacramento State College. My brother went on to Berkeley Law, where he was a graduate of. My wife from Orange County, a community college graduate, and then transferred to private college, Chapman. My daughter, right, third generation to go to California, higher education, chose a private college, USC.
Yes.
So I say that about my own family because as I look at the numbers on this page, I know, as my father knew, and as he told us as young people, that higher education, as education does, changes our lives. But as I look at the figures, I am a little concerned that at the point, and something that I want to address, that at the point where Latino enrollment is so high in education, dramatically high, it is also the point where the state of California has, for whatever reason, I believe, decided to invest less in higher education. And so to me, that is, one, a concern, and two, an issue. I also want to point out that I joined my colleague, Dr. Weber, last night as we welcomed the first African-American president in the UC, Dr. May.
Yes.
And as I welcomed him and stood with the Black Caucus to welcome him, I remember the impact that the first Latino president of UC, Dr. Tomas Rivera, had, not only in my district, Riverside, not only on my campus, UC Riverside, but on a national scale. So I think that both of these things are issues that we will continue to address as we look at the master plan. How was it different 50 years ago from our students today, and what are those needs, and how do we best address the needs of our present students?
I agree with you completely, Assemblymember Medina. I think this is the time for us to lean in and invest more in higher education and hold each of our systems accountable for being as smart administratively and financially as we can, but to make sure our infrastructure and our academic programs are supported adequately so that students from all backgrounds can benefit just like we have and prior generations have here in California. I believe this is the time for us to stand tall and invest more in this area.
Thank you, President Castro.
Thank you so much.
And please send all of our best wishes to Chancellor White on a speedy recovery.
I will. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So next I'd like to introduce Janet Napolitano, President of the University of California System. Thank you, President, for joining us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. And I've been amending my testimony as I've been listening to my colleagues, but my full written statement is before you. But I would like to begin by hearkening back to the master plan, which in essence was a compact among four parties: the state and its political leaders, the institutions of higher education, students and their families, and the people of the state of California. And under this compact, each party had a role to play. The institutions of higher education agreed to provide access to all eligible residents and to end costly duplication of programs. The state and its leaders agreed to provide sufficient and reliable general fund support. Students were required to meet certain academic standards, and they and their families were expected to pay for a greater share of non-instructional costs. For example, the master plan stated that auxiliary enterprises such as dorms and parking structures should be self-supporting. And finally, the residents of the state were expected to support sufficient taxation and general bond obligation bond acts to finance the operating and capital costs of the new campuses necessary to meet California's needs. You know, the master plan, I think we've all recognized, worked better than expected. A much higher proportion of California's population is in college now than was the case in 1960. That's true for every ethnic group and for both genders. Enrollment in public higher education institutions has increased tenfold since 1960, far exceeding the rate of the state's population growth. The University of California, the Cal State University, and the community colleges have grown enormously since 1960 in response to increasing demand for higher education. The University of California has added 4 campuses, CSU added 8, and the community colleges added 50 in the period since the master plan. But as has already been recognized, capacity is an ongoing issue that will need to be addressed by this committee. And it's not just about quantity. It's worth noting that California's institutions are among the best in the world. The California community colleges serve approximately 2.1 million students, 3 times as many community college students as the next most populous state of Texas. Cal State University campuses have been recognized as national leaders in diversity, with 6 of their universities ranked among the Wall Street Journal's top 10 colleges in the West. And then there's the University of California, highly ranked nationally and internationally, described by the New York Times as California's upward mobility machine for providing unprecedented access to low-income students who go on to graduate and succeed after college. UC has also been an economic engine for the state of California. The master plan gave the university responsibility for advanced graduate and professional education, for the research mission, and for preparing the nation's future faculty. This has attracted considerable funding and talent into California. It's also enabled UC researchers to make discoveries that have changed lives and resulted in major advances in key industries, from agriculture in the Central Valley to technology in Silicon Valley. So it's not just about preparing the workforce of the future, it's about job creation for the future. These are notable accomplishments made possible by the master plan. And as someone who served as governor in another western state, I can confidently say that we have much to be proud of here in California and how jealous other states were of the higher education system here. But this doesn't mean the master plan should remain static. And it has been noted, the plan has been reviewed and updated since 1960. For example, the 1960 master plan had UC and CSU selecting from among the students who were eligible to attend by virtue of being either in the top eighth for UC or top 1/3 for CSU of their high school graduating class. Despite the enormous growth in the number of students eligible to attend, the master plan was amended in the 1980s to make it explicit that every eligible student who applied would be guaranteed space either at UC or CSU. And when it came to affordability, the master plan's focus in 1960 was on the cost of tuition alone, with little regard to the full cost of attendance, including room and board, educational materials, transportation, or health care. Affordability remains a big issue. The master plan policies have evolved such that current students have access to federal, state, and institutional aid that makes it possible for low-income California students to attend and have their tuition costs fully covered. Indeed, at the University of California, 57% of our California resident students have their tuition fully covered. But there are other costs of attendance that need to be accommodated and need to be considered. The result of the existing financial aid commitment is that California performs better than any other state in what I like to call social mobility, educating first-generation and low-income California students and helping them enter California's high-skill, high-wage workforce. The 1960 master plan also established the community college transfer function as a key element of providing access to higher education for all qualified Californians. The master plan stipulated that both UC and CSU reserve space at the upper division level to enroll significant numbers of transfer students. The community college transfer function, however, has greatly increased, and based on the current plans for community college to prepare even more students for transfer, that invokes issues of capacity at both CSU and UC. Because transfer is a function where I believe both systems have exceeded the expectations of the master plan and will continue to do so. At the UC, we've embraced and enhanced our commitment to transfers. This year, excluding the Merced campus, we will reach our goal of achieving a 2-to-1 system-wide ratio. For every 2 freshmen, there will be 1 transfer student. And as we look forward to the next 50 years, we anticipate growth in that area. Indeed, as we look ahead to the next 50 years and contemplate ways to improve the master plan, I think there are some challenges that we need to confront. I'll briefly mention a few. The first challenge is demographics. California is unique in this sense. Other states are facing declines in their number of high school graduates. While such declines have been predicted for decades in California, the reality has been the opposite. California is bucking the trend, and every year we see more high school graduates than predicted, and more importantly, we see better prepared and more diverse high school graduates. We need these high school graduates to attend college, and we need them to attend in greater proportions if we are going to meet California's workforce demands. The second challenge is infrastructure. The state of California has slowed its investment in higher education infrastructure dramatically. We haven't had a major higher education bond act since 2006. It's hard to imagine California will find the funding to add the number of campuses built since 1960, but we must find a way to expand capacity and address deteriorating infrastructure at our existing campuses. Today's students deserve the same quality education as past generations of Californians. As we continue to expand enrollment, we must provide them with the classrooms, the laboratories, the libraries, and the living spaces they need to thrive and succeed. Another challenge is federal funding. we may not be able to count on the federal government to support higher education at the same level as it has in the past. The master plan wisely encouraged the state to enable UC faculty to spend a significant amount of their time on research as well as on teaching. This investment from the state in research-oriented faculty has paid off. The faculty bring in $4 to $5 billion annually in federal and private research funding to the state of California. The value of having a true public research university system that will help create the jobs of the future can't be overstated. Another challenge we need to confront is growing income inequality. This is a problem here in California and throughout the nation. I've already described the importance of California public higher education in generating social mobility, but a robust higher education system can help address rising income inequality by educating more California students, by driving economic growth, by serving the state's needs in areas such as healthcare and food production, and through its intellectual and research capacity. And finally, the state, the nation, and world face what I like to call grand challenges, issues such as climate change and the need for alternative energy, global food needs, challenges in healthcare delivery, immigration, and the need for continued technological innovation. California has continually and historically led the way in tackling these problems and will continue to do so with support of the University of California as its research arm. So given the magnitude of these challenges and the magnitude of our opportunity, now is neither the time to get complacent nor to de-emphasize the importance of higher education to the future of California. I encourage you to be as bold today as the leaders of the 1960s were, and to reaffirm the compact between the state of California, its public higher education institutions, our students, and the taxpayers. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, President Napolitano. Any questions from colleagues? I'll kick it off. So just kind of at a high level, you know, if we could hit the reset button on the master plan and create a master plan for the next 50 years, what changes do you think, should be made or considered as we explore kind of future hearings?
You know, I would encourage us to look at intersegmental cooperation and whether in fact there needs to be some kind of coordinating entity. I have some questions about that, by the way, whether we just be adding another layer of government, but are there ways to incentivize cooperation within the existing systems? The second is to evaluate capacity and the geographic location of capacity. And what is the process by which the state will make decisions about either new campuses or branch campuses of existing universities? The third thing I would look at is are there ways to incentivize what I'll think of as increased throughput? For example, are there ways to incentivize having more students graduate in 3 years or 3.5 years rather than 4 or 4.5 years? Because that is another way of increasing capacity. And then lastly, I would take a very forward thinking view of the marriage between higher education and workforce, because as I've tried to emphasize in my testimony, one of the things that has come out of the University of California is job creation in fields that were never even dreamt of in 1960. And so how do we make sure that the master plan is educating students who can participate in a well-educated citizenry, which is what our democracy demands, and which is a value of a higher education, and be prepared for the evolving job market of the future.
Thank you. Yes. Oh, please, Dr. Eggman, good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And my apologies for being late.
No, thank you for being here.
A lot of things going on this week. But I want to thank you for being here very much. And I think some of those were some of my questions. I represent parts of the Central Valley in Stockton, where we are the largest city in the state of California without a public higher education system within 50 miles. And I know when the audit came out that said that there is capacity in the existing systems, which, I mean, if you ever have everyone going to night school or continuing ed or all kinds of different ways, perhaps, but real people live real lives in real time. And so I guess those are my questions when we talk about equity, when we talk about the state of California, and especially about the workforce development. How do we really think about making sure all of California has the same resources and capacity so that you're not having to live right next to a major university? And also, as you pointed out, as the job market continues to train, the retraining that's going to need to continue to happen. And it can't just be our community colleges who do it.
Right. So one area that I didn't mention was the extension service provided by the University of California, which is in every county, and which is in part designed to provide that access to retraining and the like. And that hardly ever enters into any discussion about higher education in California. But it's part of our land grant responsibility as the university. And what programs we offer, how those are supported, and the like could be part of this conversation.
Mm-hmm. And the integration between the three levels, and again, I apologize, I was late. How well do you think that works? Our community college to our CSUs to the UCs, is there a seamless integration? And if not, what do we do to make that more?
So we're doing a lot on the transfer function, and as I said, we're now at a 2-to-1 ratio, which surprises a lot of people. We're going to continue to emphasize the growth of what we call transfer pathways, which is a curriculum that's available in 21 of our most popular majors. If you take those classes in community college, you transfer to a UC as a true junior in that major. All those credits come with you. Looking for mechanisms like that to streamline and clarify the transfer process. And then we need to be setting that expectation among community college students that they can transfer, and they can transfer to the UC or the CSU and make sure they're getting the kind of academic advising they need when they begin community college so they know what to take and are taking those kinds of classes.
Thank you, Mr. Medina.
Welcome again, Dr. Napolitano. I want to say that the history of UC in the state of California has been fascinating, going from one campus at Cal Berkeley, and I believe being the second one, UCLA, and what it took in the state of California as the UC system expanded, and as each region of the state sort of vied to get a UC campus, and then the creation of UC Irvine, UC Riverside, later on in the 1960s. But now in 2017, I think we're looking at a kind of a regional inequity of higher education. And we're hearing from our colleagues inland, mostly in inland California, myself, the Central Valley, areas of the state where we have the lowest college going rate, areas of the state where we have the lowest number and percentage of people with bachelor's degrees. And we're seeing, we're seeing exploring, asking, where are we going to get our teachers in Northern California, remote areas of Northern California? Where are we going to get our doctors in the Central Valley? And I think those things need to be addressed. We're seeing an effort by my colleague Adam Gray, looking for a medical school at UC Merced. We're looking in the Fresno area as well. How do they meet their health needs? Shortages of doctors, like in my own Riverside, where the establishment of the first UC medical school, the first public medical school since 1970 west of the Mississippi, right, with the creation of UCR School of Medicine. Where do they get their doctors from? I think it's something that needs to be addressed, and that is unequal distribution, right? Unequal distribution of higher education. To make sure, and I know that you talked about extension, but to make sure that across the state of California, all folks, no matter where they live, have the opportunity, and to find a mechanism that we can get there.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I think that where the University of California is concerned, building a new UC campus is a big investment, and particularly without access to capital support from the state. That needs to go into the calculus. And whether we build new UC campuses or look at branch campuses, which perhaps offer subject matter somewhat specialization, but that don't have all of the majors and all of the facilities that go into, say, a home campus. That is something that's worthy of consideration. On the healthcare issue, I should point out that I'm co-chairing with Lloyd Dean, who is the CEO of Dignity Health, a major commission on training the healthcare workforce for California's future. And it includes on the commission Chancellor White and President Oakley, as well as Superintendent of Public Instruction Torlakson, really taking a thorough and holistic view with the goal of creating a roadmap for the state on what it will take to educate that healthcare workforce.
Mr. Kiley.
Thanks for being with us today, President Napolitano. You mentioned that 57% of California undergrads in the UC attend tuition-free, which is very impressive. At the same time, we've had a pretty big increase in the cost of tuition. I think it's about tripled at the UC since 2000. And these seem to be somewhat at cross purposes that, of course, as the cost of tuition goes up, the need for tuition-related financial assistance becomes greater. So I just wanted to ask about how you envision the relationship between those two things. Is there a particular policy objective or philosophy embodied in that relationship, and how you envision it going forward, the relationship between the cost of tuition and the expansion of financial aid?
Well, I thank you. And I think you have to look at what happened in tuition in California, because while there was a significant increase since 2000, the bulk of that increase came in the early part of the decade and accelerated when state funding really plummeted. We then went into a 6-year period of a tuition freeze, followed last year by a 2.5% increase, so the first increase in 7 years. I think that, and research shows that the best model are slow, predictable tuition increases accompanied by significant financial aid that covers your lower income students, as opposed to a system where you have freezes and then, because costs do continue to increase, at some point you do have a spike. So I think that both from a predictability standpoint for students and their families, from a management standpoint from the university, for a funding standpoint from the state, looking at low predictable tuition increases accompanied by financial aid is the best model.
Thank you very much. Dr. Weber.
Yes, Dr. Napolitano, thank you for coming today and being a part of this conversation. And I think, as Mr. Medina mentioned yesterday, those of us in the Black Caucus and the various Black Alumni Associations for the University of California were very pleased with the meeting we had yesterday with the new chancellor and the fact that we have a new chancellor at UC Davis that reflects the face of our community. As I look at the numbers, and I think as things change, as you probably know, I'm looking at the number that says 6% of the population is African American in our campuses, and it's remained steady for the last 55 years, which is very alarming, especially when I recognize the fact that the 6% is not really a reflection of what's at the UC or the CSU, but it really is a reflection of the numbers that may be at community colleges. I think, if I'm correct, the UC and the CSU's numbers range around 3 to 4% of the population. So there's a growing concern always that, and especially it was interesting as I met so many members of the various alumni associations that are African Americans and the long-standing history of African Americans with the CSU and the UCs, that the numbers continue to stagnate. And I know part of it may be because of the fact that we have an African American, we have HBCUs that attract an awful lot of our students because it provides tremendous support for them. But at the same time, we're not seeing the same either level of attraction or the outreach or whatever it may be from those campuses. When I was a student at UCLA, it seemed like 1,000 years ago, UCLA had 30,000 students then. It still has about 30-some thousand students now at UCLA. And the population was about 3%, or no, maybe 1. I think there were 300 African Americans at UCLA when I was there. So it's probably about 1% when I think about it. And that included graduate and undergraduate and all the professional schools as well. So we're concerned that those numbers don't seem to grow very well, that either the attraction of those campuses is not there, or they're, either the outreach or whatever it may be. I know there's been much discussion, but I would hope that at some point, I hear the conversation consistently in this House, and it needs to be about our concern for immigrant students, the DACA students, and so forth and so on. But seldom do I hear a outreach concern for the lack of attraction in terms of African American students being attracted to the campuses, that whether it's UCLA or whether it's Merced or wherever it may be. Some campuses do a little bit better job of attracting them, but the numbers overall continue to remain small. And almost, when sometimes in my community thinks about it, feels that this population is considered insignificant by the university as it talks about its great efforts at diversity, outreach, those kinds of things. In the face of that, the glaring reality is that the African American population remains either stagnant or declining. And so that's my concern, great concern, because the numbers keep, as we talk about how we're educating the first generation college students, the first this, the first that, that obviously is not applicable in the African American community.
Right. So I'm troubled by that as well, and we're doing a number of things to try to address that. One is very targeted, almost marketing outreach into the African American community to increase the number of applicants. The second is to focus on what we call yield. In other words, admitted African American students who, for whatever reason, choose not to attend the University of California. I think there is room for growth there, and so we're reaching out individually to each admitted student, trying to marry them with a peer that's attending the particular campus or campuses they were admitted to, trying to involve our African American Alumni Association to help us with that. And then the third thing we're doing is trying to recruit more diversity into our graduate school programs, and because that's the faculty of the future. And so we have a partnership now with historically black colleges and universities where we're bringing their students to our campuses to do work on research, mentored research throughout the summer, and then recruit them into our graduate programs. And we've brought in well over 300 students to our campuses in the last few years, and a number of them have then stayed on to go to graduate school. So we're trying to attack this issue from a variety of angles. I will say that with the increased funding for enrollment growth that we got last year, so we were able to do a big jump in enrollment. We did move the needle on African American percentage as a percentage of the student body. And so funding for enrollment growth has an impact on this.
Have we done much in terms of faculty hires?
Yes. And the legislature has actually given us some dedicated funding for diversity in faculty hiring. It wasn't much. It was $2 million. But we have distributed that to projects at 3 of our campuses so that we can look at actual outcomes metrics, develop best practices. But it's something that we continually look at, what not only the overall number of African American on the faculty, but their distribution among different disciplines.
Do we ever evaluate whether or not many of our outreach programs are successful or not? I know I had a former student who was in a program at UCLA that was designed to produce law professors. And so she entered that program and got great support and those kinds of things, and then became a professor at Loyola Marymount, tenured law professor there now. And so I was curious, because there wasn't, even though they put her through the process and did a lot of things, there was no concerted effort at all to retain her at UCLA's law school. And that was concerning to me. And I found that to be true oftentimes in many things that, and I know it's hard to break through the faculty of these campuses. I've been there. I know them quite well. But it doesn't, and we've been involved in a number of these projects. And then when you get to the hiring process, when you really get to that step, it just goes awry. It doesn't always yield what we think it should have yielded as a result of the amount of investment we've done. Now, obviously, she'll do a great job at Loyola Marymount. I would have loved to see her face at UCLA's law school, and maybe someday she might be there. But it was one of those programs, and I thought, wow, this is going to lead toward this relationship or whatever it's going to be. And oftentimes it doesn't. And I've seen that in many of the postdoc fellowship programs that exist that we have. They're kind of prize programs we put on our campuses because it's great to get a postdoc program, and it does great things for a university. But if we're not going to seriously consider those individuals as potential colleagues, then we're basically producing colleagues for other campuses and not necessarily for our own.
Yeah, so we are and deploy different metrics for different kinds of programs. Mm-hmm. And obviously our overall goal is to diversify the faculty. There are a number of benefits to doing that. I can't speak to a particular case. Sometimes it's we're just outcompeted at the salary level, and that can happen particularly with the privates. But this is a topic that I raise routinely with the chancellors. One of the things we're doing, for example, is encouraging the use of implicit bias training for any faculty search committee. And in fact, the search committees for both the Davis Chancellor and the new Berkeley Chancellor had implicit bias training. And as you noted, we have our first African-American chancellor at Davis and our first female chancellor at Berkeley. And I don't know that there's a cause and effect, but it's certainly something that evidences our commitment to achieving some increased diversity. So both at the student level and at the faculty level.
Okay, because there are many factors as to why students choose to go to campuses. Graduate students particularly choose to go to campuses that have faculty that look like them because of the interest in, because it is a very personal relationship that you have.
Indeed.
And I stayed at UCLA versus going to Chicago was mainly because of Dr. Asante, who was there and who was a great mentor to me as a graduate student. So I have that concern. I also have a concern as whether or not our University of California has a strong enough ethnic studies program or degree program, and they don't have a stronger one as a CSU, obviously, as the undergraduate level, to get students, to attract them, to mentor them, and to keep them. And that's also one way of obviously getting faculty on campuses when you have areas of study that often that those groups specialize in, whether it's Chicano studies, Africana studies, whatever. And most of our UC campuses don't have, I believe, actual bachelor's degrees they may have area centers or studies or things of that nature, but not really academic departments, as one would call them. I don't believe. Berkeley has the department. UCLA has some graduate work at the top, and recently kind of developed a department among other departments, but most of them don't have very strong ethnic studies or Africana studies departments.
Right. I don't know off the top of my head how many of them do, and I can get you that information. But one of our other emphases is making sure that in the engineering schools, in the hard science schools, et cetera, that we are supporting our diversity students and also recruiting faculty there. And that's, very difficult. The number of African American PhDs in engineering, which is what we require to be on the faculty, as you know, is infinitesimal, and every school in the country is trying to recruit them. But we want to put forth the effort and really, like I said, try to do everything we can to diversify that faculty.
Well, I know you have a number of engineering programs for students, and those are good with the National Black Engineers Association, as well as MESA and a couple of other programs. So that's good, and I know it's hard to recruit in those areas. And oftentimes, at least when I was on faculty, those areas were difficult to recruit in, but even the areas that are easy to recruit in were not often recruited because there are more African Americans with EDDs than anything else, and yet in our case, we had very few faculty who ever were hired in the education department. At San Diego State, we currently have them now, but for years there were none. And yet that was the area where most of the degrees were in education, and only in probably in the last 10 to 15 years that they actually hired folks. So probably 20, 25 years of my career at San Diego State, we didn't have an African American in the School of Education, despite the fact that that's where people got their degrees. So we have a lot of work to do, but anyway, I appreciate
Indeed.
the efforts that are taking place. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. Dr. Arambula.
Thank you. First, I just wanted to give a thanks. You mentioned the upward mobility that came through UCs, and so many of our families benefited from it, as Chairman Medina mentioned, but my family as well. My father, who was a graduate of Bolt Law School, my brother, who was a Bruin, my sister, who was a banana slug, and I went...
You have a divided family.
And I went to UCSF Fresno residency, and wanted to focus my comments, if I could, on the compact and the ending of costly duplication of programs. Considering that so many of our students are place-bound, how do we start to incentivize these intersegmental cooperations or branch campuses so that we can capitalize on the upward mobility that the University of California has, while also ensuring that regions are not being left behind and that we're meeting the workforce needs of the future?
Well, the most obvious answer that comes to mind is a financial incentive to provide funding that supports transfer, that supports these intersegmental cooperation agreements and the like. That's one way. The most common way I've experienced with the legislature is the reporting requirements on the theory about as to what you count counts, and perhaps there's some kind of metric or dashboard that we can jointly work on together. But you know, I began my answer, to put the funding where the legislature believes the needs are, I think would be the number one response.
And not to, I know we're going to be brief here. If the San Joaquin Valley were a state, we'd have 4 million people, and we'd be the only state without a medical school. I think many of us are trying to search for solutions and figure out what the best partnerships we can have as we have these discussions, and just hope we can continue to have those conversations going forward to figure out how best to make sure we're having a higher education system that's meeting the needs of very different regions and communities.
I agree totally.
Thank you, Dr. Chair Medina.
I want to follow up just a little bit with what Dr. Weber mentioned on diversity on campuses. When I was an undergraduate at Purdue University, 1971, I was one of 50 Latinos on a campus of 30,000. Didn't really feel much at home. Really didn't. Didn't feel the sense of belonging. Didn't feel a sense of inclusion. Never saw another Latino faculty member. Did not have one. So when I transferred from Purdue University to UC Riverside in 1972, I thought I had gone to heaven because we had diversity on our campus. We had Latino faculty. We had black faculty. And I felt at home. And I found a home at UCR, went on, got my master's at UCR, went on and got my teaching credential at UC Riverside. So diversity on campus, as we've had hearings across the state on campus climate, I think UCR, the most diverse campus of student body in the system, is an example for other UCs. On the issue of faculty diversity, we have seen, the numbers show that it's very, very flat. I mean, almost completely flat, the number of black and Latino faculty within UC. Looks like this to me over the last 40 years. So definitely an issue that we in the legislature are much concerned about. And just that I think UC Riverside, if that could be copied, campus climate, the number of students makes a difference to the students. So on the most highly sought campuses, UCLA, Cal Berkeley, UC San Diego, those are the campuses where we see the least diversity.
Well, thank you, President Napolitano. I really appreciate you participating today, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more conversations moving forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So next, I'd like to welcome Kristen Soares, President of the Association of Independent California Colleges and Universities.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Before I start, I brought a copy of the original master plan that I'm happy to show you all, but as I was glancing through it in preparation of this and just looking through it today, Chapter 4, it's students, the title is Students, the Problem of Numbers. And to read it here, the enrollments in the state's higher education institutions have been growing during the past decade. It's apparent to anyone acquainted even casually with their campuses. So what I would say, what's remarkable about this committee and what I've been hearing today from all of you is just your deep commitment to higher education, to the master plan and what higher education is going to look like going forward. So again, thank you very much for having AICCU and myself here. What I think I'd like to do is just tell you a little bit about the sector and then go into our role in the master plan. So the independent sector, as we are often know, serves over 186,000 students, or just over 22% of enrollment among the four-year segments each year. We offer also college opportunities to 27,000 low-income Cal Grant students. The ability of our institutions to provide individualized attention in small classroom settings within a specific campus environment that seeks to serve their students and their needs is a hallmark of our education. It also leads to higher education rates. Graduation rates. We are proud that our Cal Grant students have a higher four-year graduation rate of 63% compared to their peers of 52%, despite the challenges that many low-income first-generation students confront in college. As a sector, we are a leader in preparing California's advanced professional workforce with over 152,000 graduate students in fields such as dentistry, pharmacy, medicine, law, and almost all aspects of STEM. We also prepare over 43% of credentialed new K-12 teachers each year. Our student body reflects the diversity of this state, and that diversity, I think, is on par with what we heard earlier from Jennifer Kuhn. Of our undergraduate students, 39% are Caucasian, and 60% are Latino, Asian American, African American, and Native American. Before I go into the sector's role in California higher education landscape, I would like to speak a little bit about AICCU, who we are and how we represent our member institutions. The 78 institutions that are members of AICCU are all private, nonprofit, and regionally accredited, all with a rich diversity of academic and research missions. Some institutions are comparable to UC, while others are comparable to CSU in terms of academic focus, research capabilities, admissions, and other aspects. Each institution is governed by an autonomous board of trustees who hire their presidents or chancellors to implement each campus's mission. We are not a system, as we all refer to CSU and UC. Rather, we are a federation of independent colleges and universities. So we have no statewide system office or common governing board. Instead, we have AICCU to share our expertise and serve as the voice for our sector. So AICCU is a quasi-central office for the sector. We were founded in 1955 to partner with the state as policymakers at that time worked on the creation of the California State Scholarship Program, today known as the Cal Grant Program. Our establishment was to support a public-private partnership with the state to ensure students have access to a higher education institution in California, whether public or private, and to relieve enrollment pressures on the state colleges, public colleges, and universities. And it also was it was to save the state money by utilizing the capacity and facilities of our institutions. So the past, the independent sector had a very important role in the establishment of the master plan and its framework. In fact, the chair of the master plan survey committee was the president of Occidental College at the time, Arthur Coons. Representatives from the private nonprofit colleges and universities also served on every one of the advisory committees to the survey team. It is written in the master plan, quote, "The great contribution private colleges and universities have made and will continue to make to the state. The master plan has included these institutions in the recommended statewide coordinating agency with the opportunity for an authentic voice bearing on policies directly affecting their welfare. Our partnership with the state is part of the plan, and it continues to this day." The independent colleges were recognized as having distinct missions and serving an important role in providing access to students across the state. So our role in the master plan was envisioned then, and it has a continuous role today. As the state re-examines the master plan, and its future, we would ask how you think to, again, utilize our capacity. And I think you've heard of many of the capacity challenges today. And how can we be a better and more critical and strategic partner in thinking about utilizing our capacity? The way we have done that most often is through financial aid, as I think I mentioned a little bit about the Cal Grant program. So with the state's help, the state can make students and make it affordable for students to attend the sector. Again, relieving enrollment pressure and associated costs in public university systems. Our 78 institutions have campuses, over 200 campus locations throughout the state. Some are in areas where there is no UC or CSU presence. We provide access regionally, and we provide access to areas where they really need the workforce preparation. So I mentioned the K through 12. This is where we can really come in, particularly in the Central Valley. So when the state created the state scholarship program, it was again for this access. As we look forward, we need to continue to invest in this program to make it sustainable and affordable. And this has been an issue for our sector. The Cal Grant has not been increased since 1999 and has experienced cuts. So today the grant is worth 48% less in real dollars. So if our institutions are to be utilized by the state as a cost-effective way to increase access by the California low-income students, we must re-examine the role and level of financial aid to both incentivize these students to attend higher education and succeed in a timely manner and ensure they have true access to the campus that best fits their need, academic, and career goals. The Cal Grant is the core of our partnership between the state. It is on average, this per grant that AIC institutions match by some $18,000 individually in institutional aid. So the Cal Grant means that for every dollar, with the Cal Grant means that for every dollar the state provides, institutions provide two. It is a true public-private partnership. It also only applies to students for 4 years, so regardless of the degree or an student or academic requirements. So it really does incentivize students in a 4-year manner. As suggested by the legislative analysts in the last year's state budget negotiations, California needs to once again grow the awards so that more low-income students can attend private nonprofit institutions and thereby help, in turn, relieve the enrollment pressures on public institutions. The LAO also noted that private sector enrollments also save the state money and increase student access. As we move forward, we would hope that we can, again, protect these students from cuts and really look at this as a part of the future master plan for access and success. Secondly, I think as you heard, the master plan also placed an important emphasis on transfer from our community colleges to 4-year institutions. Those transfers do not just happen between the public universities. Our institutions also provide access to California Community College transfer students to attain their baccalaureate degrees. Transfer students make significant contributions to campus life. And today, nearly every undergraduate AICCU institution actively accepts and reserves places for transfer students. Today, 56 of the 69 undergraduate serving institutions have formalized articulation agreements with their regional community colleges. And we are looking to ways to always improve this. Recently, we had a meeting with Chancellor Oakley and his team to think about how our sectors can work jointly together to streamline the transfer process between our two systems, particularly as that system looks to increase its number of transfer students. We have also heard about how the sectors are working together. And I think this is where the private colleges and independent colleges have really taken on this challenge, especially at the regional level, to create the innovative partnerships particularly with the regional community colleges, to think about how to utilize space and to utilize faculty expertise in both systems. An example of this, and around workforce needs. So an example of this would be in San Diego, Point Loma University has partnered with multiple local community colleges to allow college students to complete their Bachelor of Science in Nursing to advance their profession, and again, to provide critically needed healthcare professionals in San Diego region. Point Loma professors, thank you, teach the courses at the community colleges so the students never have to leave. So it's really meeting the needs of students of where they are, and I think we can do more of this. There's also innovation taken in many other areas. I would note the University of Pacific, which is in San Joaquin, where there is no public four-year institution, has developed very active relationships with the San Joaquin Community College, as well as the school district there, to create a pipeline for early childhood educators to earn their bachelor degree. Thank you for the water. So, moving on to the future. As we discussed in the master plan, what we've heard today, the state has changed significantly. The demographics of the state have changed. The economy has changed. And the perceived value of higher education has changed. And how we address that going forward is going to have to, I think, be in a holistic review. Our state, the demographics of who we are today, I'm proud to say that the institutions of the AICCU reflect this diversity. And the core elements of a private education are wraparound student services, small classrooms, small campus environments, access to financial aid, really continue to be the hallmarks in our ability to enroll and graduate, especially historically disadvantaged students. To improve access, graduation, and to help meet the workforce needs, I think we need to really think about, again, more creative and innovative programs and around expanded ways of delivery. What we haven't talked a lot about today is the future and the role of distance education and hybrid and online learning. So this is going to be I think, a modality that's going to continue to need focus. It really gives us the ability to meet the needs of non-traditional, the adult working student who are working full-time and have jobs. And families to say. So I'm going to wrap up here since I have a minute left to go. I just want to say that going forward, we are here to be a strong partner as we have been. We value the partnerships we have at the public universities. We value the partnerships we have at the regional level with the many communities we work with. And we are here, again, to be a resource, and thank you.
Thank you, President Soares. I want to open up to colleagues. Any questions or comments? Chairman Medina.
Yeah, I would just say quickly, having Cal Baptist University in my district, having Loma Linda and La Sierra University nearby, having a daughter who attended a private college, very much value the place in California for the private colleges. You mentioned very briefly the graduation rate. Mm-hmm. Could you say a little bit more what the graduation rate tends to be across the private colleges, and why do they do better?
I talked a little bit about the campus at slides, wraparound student services. I think why we do better is the small class size. So on average, our faculty to student ratio is 12 to 1. And the ability to know your professor, and then when that professor knows your name, when you walk around that campus, that's a wraparound service that leads to success. And as I mentioned, our graduation rate is about 63%. And we can do more, we can do better, and we're looking at that.
Thank you very much, and thank you, President Soares. I just want to reemphasize the importance of our independent California colleges and universities. You know, the system of higher education is a big ecosystem with a lot of different actors, and it's important that everybody works symbiotically together. And I think our independent colleges and universities can be great laboratories for experimenting and exploring what might work, and then figuring out if that can transfer to our public systems of higher education. So it's critical that we work together. The master plan was meant to does emphasize that partnership, and it's something that will definitely continue.
Thank you for bringing that up. Because of the independence of nature of the institutions, our ability to be innovative and act a little bit more quickly, we can be that laboratory.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate it. So we're going to move on to public comment, and we have a list of speakers. With the attempt of finishing by noon, I'm going to ask that everybody keep their comments to 2 minutes. And I want everyone to keep in mind we're going to have 4 more hearings, and our hearings are the future hearings are going to dive into specific topics on student needs, on faculty needs, on needs of industry and job creation. So keep that in mind as you make your comments, and I look forward to everybody participating in future hearings as well. So I first want to recognize Jennifer Egan, President of the California Faculty Association. Thank you for coming today.
Hi, thank you so much. Good morning, Chair Berman and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Egan. I'm the president of the California Faculty Association. We represent more than 28,000 tenure-line professors, lecturers, librarians, coaches, and counselors in the CSU system. The system that once promised an affordable, quality higher education to every student in California is broken, and California is failing its students and the state's future economic prosperity by not prioritizing higher education. Not only are we failing to uphold the master plan for higher education, legislators in the CSU administration are proposing and in some cases approving downright destructive ideas that run counter to the master plan. I would like to provide you with 3 examples. The first, Senator Hill has a bill that continues to allow community colleges to offer Bachelor's of Arts degrees. This is in contradiction to the master plan, which sets aside this role for the CSU and UC systems. Legislators have said in part that this is to reduce costs, but in reality it dilutes the mission of the community college system and takes existing resources away from current community college students. If the CSU does not have the resources to teach a needed BA program, the state should provide those resources so it can. Another example of bad policy. Between 2007 and 2015, the CSU has grown the number of management personnel at twice the rate of faculty, while the total student population of the CSU grew by 13.5%. The people responsible for providing an education for these hundreds of thousands of students, faculty, grew by only 7%, but management personnel grew by 15%. During a recent oversight hearing, the CSU administration confessed to making hiring decisions one position at a time instead of looking at the system as a whole or even departmental resources and needs. This means that money was spent on hiring managers that could have been spent adding classes and resources so that students can get the courses they need to graduate. The last example is the so-called California Promise Initiative. Senator Glazer and other legislators proposed bills or floated ideas to give priority resources in class selection to full-time students. While this sounds like a good idea, it is not. It would put working class and predominantly black and brown students at a disadvantage because it does not take into consideration the realities of their lives. That these students, many of these students need remediation, some students have to work full-time jobs, and that there are insufficient mentoring resources on campus. Instead, the legislature and the CSU should ensure that there are enough classes, and thus faculty, to meet the demand so students don't go broke or hungry while trying to pay for school, and that there are enough counselors, both psychological and academic, to guide students toward their graduation goal. As these hearings continue, we look forward to faculty and students sharing perspectives on the problems the CSU face and solutions that put students first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Lillian Tays, and I apologize if I got it wrong, from the California Faculty Association.
You got it right. Good morning. And this has been a fascinating conversation. You all are doing a really interesting bit of work here. CFA believes that the Master Plan for Higher Education set important goals for the state's higher education, access, affordability, and quality for our students. We recognize that the efforts to implement those goals have meant that millions of students have achieved their individual dreams, myself included, and equally important, our state has prospered socially, politically, and economically. While we appreciate the modest reinvestment that the state has made, however, increasingly we believe the state is failing our system and our students. The failure to adequately fund higher education means that access and affordability have been compromised. It's stunning to realize that in 1985, per student general fund funding for the CSU was $11,607, while in 2015 per student funding had dropped to $6,888. Furthermore, this year alone, more than 30,000 qualified students were turned away from the CSU, and those who were able to attend paid tuition that had increased by a staggering 923% since 1985, far outstripping the rate of inflation. Quality in student success has also been threatened by disinvestment. 50 years of research shows that interaction with faculty is key to student success. Yet while system-wide there are more than 150,000 additional students in the CSU today than there were in 1985, there are 276 fewer full-time equivalent permanent instructional faculty today to do the work on the ground.
And if you could wrap up as quickly as possible, thank you.
We have distributed a copy of our report, Equity Interrupted, in which we noted the change in state funding just in the period of time when the diversity of the student body has increased. It has led one of our faculty members to conclude that as CSU students got darker, the system's funding got lighter. This is precisely why we're excited about the work that this committee is doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Brianna Rodriguez, a Sonoma State student.
Hello, Chairman Berman and fellow legislators. Thank you for holding this hearing today. My name is Brianna Rodriguez, and I'm a psychology major with a Spanish minor going into my third year at Sonoma State University. The master plan for higher education may have been established more than 50 years before I entered the CSU, but it paved the way for myself and my peers to be able to obtain a high-quality education. The intent of the plan was solid, but there have been very bad decisions made over the years that have resulted in my education becoming more expensive, stressful, and graduation more difficult. These decisions created barriers that only make students work harder for an outcome that is not as good as it used to be before. I'm a proud first-generation, low-income woman of color and immigrant to this country as a child who has made it to the CSU system. I currently work 3 jobs and carry 17 units. I want to graduate in 4 years, but the number of classes available are limited. More and more of my instructors are lecturers, and they, like tenured colleagues, are stretched too thin. I hear from many of my peers that they are delayed in graduating because they can't get into the classes they need. We need real solutions to the problem plaguing the CSU. And on behalf of my fellow students and we urge you to find real solutions. Only then can the master plan deliver what it promised. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next is Jonathan Lightman from the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Jonathan Lightman. As the Executive Director of FAC, I'm entering my 19th year in this position. I have participated in both the reviews of the early 2000s and of 2010. Be happy to share with you or other members of the committee what worked and what didn't work in those discussions. My recommendation to you as you go forward with this effort that we carefully integrate conversations of infrastructure with issues of desired student achievement. And I noted that President Napolitano mentioned infrastructure quite a bit. In her remarks, she was discussing physical infrastructure. And while that's part of it, we also have to consider human infrastructure. That would include operational needs, student services, financial aid, and as the prior speakers from the California Faculty Association mentioned in the CSU system, also the faculty. We stand right now at 56.4% credit classroom instruction taught by full-time faculty in the community college system. We have conversations about diversity. We have conversations about serving students better, about closing achievement gaps, and yet we have no plan to achieve a goal that was established 20 years ago, and we separate it from other conversations on closing achievement gaps. These two conversations have to be merged, and if we have a plan moving forward to say one does not occur without the other, I'm confident that with the work of this committee we can get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next is Jalger Kalminj. And
I always know it's my turn when they pause.
Sure, I got that wrong.
My name's Yelcher Kalmain, and I'm the president of University Professional Technical Employees and part of the Reclaim Higher Education Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly. My comments will be a lot briefer because a lot of my colleagues have said a lot of what I intended to say. It's really notable that the need for higher education has greatly increased, our diversity has greatly increased, and the resources have greatly decreased. That's really kind of the summary of where the master plan is at. And what we need to do is, rather than fight over the pieces of pie and figure out which part goes where and try to be a little bit more efficient, we need to look at the big picture and come together. Often I come before you, legislators here, critical of the University of California where I work at UC San Diego, and we end up fighting each other over particular situations at our colleges. This is an opportunity, thank you very much for bringing this hearing together, for us to come together and bring to the citizens of California the vision that brought us here in the first place, that brought me as a graduate of UC San Diego. When I went to UC San Diego, I worried about my physics exam, not about my debt. My parents came here, work at University of California. I could not offer that same promise to my kids, who ended up not going to UC, despite being accepted at the UC colleges because of the cost. We need to find a real solution. We need to find a way to work together, even though we are often at different points in the intersection here, whether we're employers or the students or the staff or legislators or the citizens. I believe very firmly that there is support among the California citizenry for higher education. Prop 30 passed. We can do something better if we provide a real vision together to do this. If we sit here and fight about the pieces, we're not going to find any solutions. So I very much welcome this, and we will want to participate in this process as one of the unions at the University of California, and want to work together with management on this case to really provide a vision so that there are enough resources so we don't end up fighting over the few resources that there are. And it's incumbent upon the legislature to really provide a vision, and the governor and our next governor to provide a vision where we can really get adequate funding for public higher education once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And next is Eric Hayes from the Council of UC Faculty Associations.
Morning. I've heard a lot about efficiencies, and I think that's very laudable. I think it's worth pointing out, though, that California's public higher education systems have been very efficient for a very long time, going back the entire 55-year span of the master plan. California resources available for higher education students in California are lower than almost every other state. Only in 2016, according to Chef data, only 3 states had fewer resources per higher education student than California. So one thing that does need to be spoken about is resource starvation. My organization is a member of the Reclaim California's Higher Education Coalition, which is a coalition of representatives from all the segments, as well as across the segments, in other words, faculty, staff, students, and people outside of the systems, just the people of the state. And we prepared a report about 9 months ago, which we've distributed around the Capitol, which goes into great detail about how we can fix the problem, how much it would cost, and how we can raise that money. And I've passed around a 2-page brief summary of it, which has more contact information at the bottom if you have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next up is David Palter from the Silicon Valley Leadership Group.
Good afternoon, Assemblymember Berman. I'm David Palter with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. We applaud your efforts to envision a new master plan for higher education. From our perspective, representing 400 companies in Silicon Valley, we hope that this committee takes a close look at the growing STEM talent gap in California. Silicon Valley's innovation economy is fueled by STEM talent, but our institutions of higher learning are producing STEM graduates at a lower rate than rival innovation hubs like Boston and Austin. And our companies, as you know, are increasingly turning to out-of-state talent to compete. In 2015, only 20% of STEM workers in Silicon Valley were born in California. In 2016, only 18% were California-born. We look forward to working with this committee and the assembled higher education partners to build stronger training and hiring relationships with California colleges. A new master plan, one focused on preparing students for the dynamic 21st century workplace, has the potential to turn these numbers around and ensure that Californians of all backgrounds can contribute to and share in the benefits of a new innovation economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker today will be Jake Bremner from the Campaign for College Opportunity.
Thank you, Chair Berman. Jake Bremner with the Campaign for College Opportunity. We're a nonprofit coalition dedicated to expanding college access and student success in our state, and we very much appreciate your leadership in convening and leading this conversation. We urgently need a new commitment and a new vision for higher education that both produces more college graduates for our economy and also preserves the promise of college opportunity regardless of a student's race, income, or zip code. I'd like to leave with you copies of a report card that the campaign issued earlier this year that measures our state's progress against the projected workforce gaps that we will be facing. Thank you again, and we look forward to the continuation of this conversation.
Thank you very much. And so, to wrap it up, I just want to thank everyone who attended today, everyone who participated today, everyone who watched online or on TV, and the Legislative Analyst's Office, the heads of all the higher education institutions, and the folks who spoke in public comment. This is just the first conversation we're going to have, as I mentioned, and we'll be holding 4 more hearings across the state over the next year to dive much deeper into the various issues that came up today. I think what's clear from the conversation today is that our systems of higher education are the backbone of the state, both in terms of upward economic mobility and in terms of economic vitality in California. And the master plan that was created 57 years ago was an incredibly visionary and foundational document. But we've heard time and time again today that the situation in the state has changed quite a bit since then, and there are improvements that hopefully can be made to the plan and to our systems of higher education. So thank you, everybody, for participating. I'm really looking forward to the next conversation. Take a look at my website and reach out to my staff. I want to thank my legislative director, Ellen Green, and don't hesitate to reach out to her to make sure that you're kept in the loop as the conversations continue. And I look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Thank you very much. And we're adjourned.